I'm actually going to be introducing two speakers, and the next speaker is Dr. CathyVakil. Cathy has a day job. She is a professor of family medicine at London University at Queen's. She's also the author of a very extensive review of all of the Canadian research that had been published up to 2008 on radioactivity and health. Please welcome Cathy back.
Thanks, Dale, and I'm actually really happy to be here today because I think that this topic has been completely under the radar far too much. This was a massive public health catastrophe that maybe got a bit of media attention for a couple of months and then everybody thought it went away. It's been totally ignored really by the Canadian government to the point where just last week the Ontario government has agreed to spend, at this point I think $600 million to rebuild one of the reactors in Ontario. And the reactor in the Quebec government and the Brunswick government are considering the same. So obviously they haven't got the message and they haven't learned the lessons that the people in Japan paid so dearly for. So I'm going to be speaking to you about radioactivity and health and a bit about the nuclear industry. So what is radioactivity? It's also called ionizing radiation or radium. How does it affect us? How does it harm us? What does it do to us? And where does it come from? How are we exposed to it? And then a little bit about what goes on inside a nuclear reactor and some of the many very toxic fission products that come from nuclear fallout. There are many, many others, but these are the ones that we tend to measure and tend to discuss: iodine, cesium, and strontium. And then a little bit about the studies that we do have that have looked at the fallout, the health effects of the above ground nuclear testing in Nevada from the 50s and 60s, and some of the studies that have been done elsewhere, and then a little bit about Chernobyl, which probably can be extrapolated to Fukushima, seeing as Fukushima was as serious, if not more serious, than Chernobyl. So what is ionizing radiation? So if anybody remembers their high school chemistry, the periodic table of all the elements, about 100, a little bit more than 100. Every atom, every element has have protons which have weight and they're positively charged, and electrons which don't have weight and they're negatively charged. And every atom has equal numbers of each. So they're neutral, the charges, but they also have neutrons which are not charged, and they contribute to the weight. Now, some elements have more than one type of themselves, and they're called isotopes, and the way they differ, they're exactly the same, except they differ in the number of neutrons, so their weight is a little bit different. Some of these are stable, and some are unstable, and we call those radioactive. And what they just have this propensity to sort of fling off subatomic particles, little bits of themselves, or high-energy photons, and we call this radiation, or ionizing radiation, or radioactivity. When an element or an atom particle gives off some subatomic particles, we say it decays, and then it actually becomes a different, either isotope or another different element, which itself may be radioactive, and it will continue to drop off these particles, which are called daughters or progeny, until it reaches something that's stable. So an example is uranium-238. So these come all the way down. They're each unstable and radioactive, and they eventually, any one atom of uranium-238 will go down that chain to become lead-206. Now the rest of the bars show what's called the half-life. The half-life of uranium-238 is 4.5 billion years, and that is the time it takes for half of that uranium, say you have a gram of uranium-238, in 4.5 billion years, half of it has become thorium-234. So there's a big range of half-lives. It can be billions of years right down to one of these is actually microseconds. Interesting is radon, which maybe some of you have heard of. Radon is a gas. It's a potent lung carcinogen, and it's actually the cause of lung cancer, the most common cause of lung cancer after smoking. And it's considered to be the cause most of the time of lung cancer that is in non-smokers. And when you disturb rock, the radon escapes, and the Canadian government is actually starting to pay attention to this, and you can actually get a radon measuring kit from Home Depot. Also of interest is the second bottom one, which is polonium-210, which is very, very, very toxic in small doses. And this man is Alexander Litvinenko, who was a Russian spy, KGB spy, who then began to criticize the Russian government. He moved to the UK, and I think it was 2006, died mysteriously of acute radiation sickness, and it was found to be polonium poisoning. Still felt to be killed by Russian spies. But anyway, that's a picture of him on his deathbed, and he died within a few weeks of acute radiation sickness. So uranium has three isotopes, 238, 235, and 234. Most of it in the rock is 238. So when we mine it, and in Canada most of that goes on in northern Saskatchewan, a little bit elsewhere, including Ontario, it's like any mine. It's a big pit, and then you take out the rock, and in this case you crush it and try and extract it. We extract out the uranium, and that is what's called yellow cake. What's left is a whole ton of radioactive rubble, pieces of dust. It gets into the air, water, and soil. They pour water over it to keep down the radon gas, and this is what's called tailings ponds. Very polluted, and in this case the pollutant is radioactive. The yellow cake is transported by rail or truck to Port Hope, which is just east of Toronto, where it is refined, and different types of it are made to go into different kinds of reactors. Some of it is sent to the States to be what's called enriched. And the enrichment process basically, the US reactors need more 235 and 238, so it's reversed as to what's natural. So they kind of put it through a filter, and they end up with a waste product of U-238, and this is called depleted uranium, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. At this point, I also want to mention that the cost of this to the environment is astronomical, but the cost in money of this whole industry is also astronomical. And this is just a picture, I believe it might be Elliott Lake, which is in northern Ontario, tailings ponds. So what happens inside a reactor? You've got bundles of uranium, and they're called fuel bundles. And inside the reactor, they are bombarded with neutrons. And what happens is it splits apart the atoms, and they release more neutrons, and it becomes a cycle, or I should say a chain. This is called nuclear fission, and it's self-sustaining, and you can't stop it once it starts. In a nuclear bomb, this is what happens, and it's out of control, and you get a massive blast, and a huge amount of heat released. Inside a reactor, you kind of moderate this with neutron absorbing and moderating materials, and you're constantly cooling it to control the amount of heat. And that heat is used to boil water, which triggers turbines, which produces electricity. And that's how that works. But really what's happening inside a nuclear reactor is a bomb that's being detonated slowly and in a controlled manner. And you can see what happens when you lose the control. You have an accident. So the fuel rods, I will get into alpha and gamma emission in a minute, but fuel rods are largely alpha emitters, which means the radioactivity does not penetrate your skin, so you can actually handle it. When it comes out the other end, the spent fuel rods are highly radioactive and toxic, with mostly gamma radiation, which is penetrating, so if you go near it, you will die very, very soon. And it's full of fission products and fragments of uranium atoms, and 200 brand new elements that are not natural. They're human-made inside a reactor. And one of those is plutonium. Plutonium is also used as a fuel in some reactors. So some people will say that, one of the things you can do that's really good about this waste is that you can recycle it. So what they do in a very, very toxic way, they pull out the plutonium, but they're still left with all the rest of the highly radioactive and toxic waste. So it is not any kind of solution to this problem of what to do with the waste. But the other thing about plutonium is is that it is what is in a nuclear bomb. So this is the link between the nuclear power industry and the nuclear weapons industry. So acquiring spent fuel is a way to get hold of plutonium. Anyway, the spent fuel rods are so hot, they have to be cooled, constantly having cold water over them for 10 years before they can even be handled to put into dry storage. And as of yet, no one worldwide has ever figured out what to do with this. So it just piles up. Right now, I think in Canada, we have about 40,000 tons just sitting at the reactor site. So what are the health effects of ionizing radiation? Well, there are different kinds. One is what I mentioned, gamma, and that penetrates through you. It's like an X-ray. So it damages the cells on the trajectory wherever it's going, whatever tissue it's going through. But once the exposure stops, the damage stops. That's the good thing about it, if you can say there's anything good about it. Alpha and beta are non-penetrating, meaning you can handle them, but they're what are called internal emitters. So if you ingest them, or you inhale them, or you absorb them through your skin, they get right inside you, and as they throw off those little subatomic particles at high speed, they damage the tissue around where that particle is lodged. Polonium, U-238, and radon are all alpha emitters, and that's why radon is so bad, because you inhale it, and that's what gives you lung cancer, because it lodges in your lung tissue. Strontium, cesium, iodine are all beta emitters, a little bit less damaging, but still internal emitters all the same. And one thing that's important to remember is that once these start their radioactive decay chain, you can't stop them. It's not like gamma where you stop the ray and the damage stops. They are in you for however long that half-life is. And generally speaking, it's estimated that something, as it decays, it disappears. It takes about 10 times the half-life. So if a half-life is long, it's going to be inside you wreaking havoc for a very long time. There's acute radiation sickness, which we understand because it happens right away and we can see it. It's the chronic lower level emissions exposure that's harder to track and harder to prove. If those internal emitters, or even the gamma rays, they can damage the DNA inside your cell, inside your nucleus of your cell. And DNA damage can cause cancer and birth defects, which therefore cause miscarriage, stillbirth, and problems with fertility, immune dysfunction, diabetes, and we know that it accelerates atherosclerosis, so it causes heart disease. And if it affects sperm and egg, it will cause inheritable disease, which can actually take a few generations to manifest. This is a picture of a particle of plutonium. I think it's in the lung tissue of some kind of monkey, I think. Anyway, you can see the little lines coming out, the lines coming out of the particle. That's the trajectory of particles as they're emitted from that radioactive particle. And they're causing a lot of damage in those cells right around where the particle is lodged. The most susceptible cells are the ones that are reproducing quickly, like blood cells, gonads, especially sperm, embryonic tissue, in other words, a growing fetus or a growing child, and GI tract. And you have to remember that it's continuous and irreversible. Once it starts, you can't stop it. The internal emitters, because they're in you and they have to go down that decay chain until they're down to something stable. Now, people talk about background radiation, and averaged out, it's about 2.4 millisieverts per year. Millisievert is just a measure of radioactivity. Mostly cosmic rays, like from the sun, and then radon. In Canada right now, we are allowed 1.0 millisieverts per year, and that's acceptable extra for the public. And this will be from nuclear, the chronic low-level emission from nuclear reactors, any above-ground weapons testing, and that low level stopped in the 60s. That is still wreaking havoc now. Nuclear accidents, and then things like medical procedures and air travel will contribute to that. Now, interestingly, nuclear workers in Canada are allowed 100 millisieverts over 5 years, so averaged out 20 millisieverts compared to the public who are only allowed 1, to a maximum of 50 millisieverts in any 1 year. This translates to about 3 excess cases of cancer, fatal cancer, per 100 workers over a 40-year career. And this is in contrast to any other occupation, which is maybe 1 in 10,000 or 1 in a million we allow 3 and 100 for nuclear workers. So in terms of safety, worldwide, generally, scientists accept what's called the linear non-threshold model, which means that as your exposure goes up, your risk goes up in a linear fashion. And what that means, too, is there isn't any safe threshold that any amount of radioactivity is harmful, particularly to children. And also, women are more sensitive than men, and that isn't totally understood from what I read, why that is. And something you have to remember, too, is when they're estimating these doses, they're assuming that your dose is distributed equally, diffusely over your whole body, which is not the case, because especially the internal emitters, well, with the gamma, too, if it's just one ray, it is localized to whatever tissue it's lodged in. So, and that's an important distinction to make. And another distinction to make is that we don't really know what's safe, and we don't really understand this. We have a very poor understanding of radioactivity in health. The safety standards that we use are based on the LSS, which is the lifespan study of Hiroshima survivors. They looked at 120,000 people who survived Hiroshima, and they tracked their mortality from 1950 to 1997. Now you have to remember, this was a massive blast of mostly gamma radiation, and we're extrapolating that to our exposures, which are generally low-level chronic. They did find cancer, they found all those other illnesses, and interestingly they found the survivors' offspring that were conceived after the blast did not have any increased birth defects in cancer, even though they studied it right up to the late 1990s. However, there were a lot of problems with the methodology of this study, biggest being probably that the control group, which is your comparison group, was people that lived close by. And when your control group is probably also exposed, you're not going to see a whole big difference between your exposed group and your what they consider non-exposed group. They also missed the first 5 years. So all those people that died in the first 5 years are not counted here. And again, it's a one-time blast, which is not really comparable when you're trying to measure chronic low-level emissions. You're also talking about a healthier cohort that survived the first 5 years. And again, today's safe levels are derived from this. So looking at studies that have been done, I'm just going to briefly go over this. Ursula Franklin, who's a professor in Toronto and a very staunch human rights advocate, looked at strontium-90 levels in baby teeth, and this has been used a lot to measure exposures, particularly of the above-ground nuclear testing. And she found the kids that got leukemia had more strontium in their baby teeth. And her work actually contributed to John Kennedy in the U.S. ceasing above-ground weapons testing in the U.S. I think that was 1966. And it's a very good example of how a health professional, through research, can change policy. She also prompted what's called the Tooth Fairy Project, which is still going on out of New Jersey, which is collecting baby teeth from children all over the place, and looking at children that live near nuclear reactors downwind from 3 Mile Island, comparing strontium in the teeth of children that get leukemia versus who don't. So it's a very interesting project. In the UK in the 80s, there were some anecdotal concerns about children near facilities, nuclear facilities, getting more leukemia. It prompted the COMARE studies, that's Commission on Medical Aspects of Radiation in the Environment. And then they had some concerning findings that prompted a whole lot of studies in Europe, which I'm not going to get into. But I do want to talk about this one study that came out in 2008 from Germany. It was a case control study, which is a stronger methodology than the studies that have been done before. And they looked at all the kids living around all 16 nuclear reactors and assessed their risk of developing leukemia in radiuses around the reactors. And they found that children under 5 who lived within 5 kilometers of all 16 of their reactors had a higher rate of risk of developing leukemia. This was also done, the same kind of study, and it just came out in January of this year in France. It's called the GeoCap study, the same kind of thing, and they found that children under 15 living within 5 kilometers of all of their 19 reactors had a higher risk of developing leukemia. Double risk, almost a double risk. Canada, we've done almost no studies, very poor methodology, all of them. However, they have indicated some risks of cancer, including leukemia in children, Down syndrome, and neural tube defects, which is a kind of birth defect. But we haven't done any large case control studies, and continue to ignore the whole issue. Just a note about weapons proliferation. Plutonium, as I mentioned, is part of the waste, as is tritium. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen, and we produce a lot of it in our CANDU reactors, just because of the way it's designed. But it is also the hydrogen bomb, so it is a target for terrorist acquisition. Also, terrorist attacks. I mean, you just need to drive a plane into Pickering nuclear either reactor or any reactor, and you're going to prompt a massive blast and accident. Again, a topic of a whole other conference. There's no meaningful medical response to nuclear war. And I just want to say a word about depleted uranium. This is the waste product after enrichment, and it is very dense and very hard. So they use it. The United States makes bullet casings out of it, and they put it on the outside of tanks. So when these are used in other countries, they've got radioactive bullet casings and radioactive burnt-out tanks all over the place that the civilians are exposed to. Nobody's studied this. Remember, if you want to show that something is perfectly safe and say it with confidence, you just don't study it. So nobody's studied Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, although there are lots of anecdotal evidence that children are being born with gross birth defects, way higher numbers than there were before, and people are getting cancer, as well as the war vets coming back. And again, nobody wants to study it, although there was one study from Italian NATO war vets from Bosnia that did find higher rates of lymphoma. But that's the story, the unconscionable story of depleted uranium. So I'm briefly just going to go over Fukushima because we've already talked about this a lot. So there was the flood and they lost the coolant. So fires, explosions, meltdowns, contaminated water, air pollution going worldwide, release of all these nuclear fission products, and traces found, of course, all over Japan. Milk, drinking water, and residues on fruits on the west coast, and even over to the east coast of North America, breast milk in Tokyo. Again, a major lack of disclosure of the Japanese, and a lack of monitoring here. Interesting comment from somebody way back in 1972, nuclear power is safe only if no act of God is permitted. Now where does nuclear fallout come from? Well, from the above ground nuclear weapons testing, from nuclear power accidents, and from major nuclear bombs. Inhaled, ingested, and absorbed through the skin. I'm going to talk about these three: iodine, cesium, and strontium. So iodine has a half-life of 8 days. It's a beta emitter, so it's an internal emitter, and it accumulates in the thyroid and causes thyroid cancer, especially in children. It's got a long latency, so we aren't going to see this perhaps for decades in Japanese children or children elsewhere. Cesium-137 is a half-life of 30 years, which means it's around a very long time. It's an internal and gamma emitter. The body mistakes it for potassium, so it tends to pool in soft tissue, so the muscle in the brain, and also in the soft tissue of meat, cows, or any other animal, and then if we eat that, we're eating cesium-137. It causes cancer. And strontium-90, again, a long half-life, and it's an internal emitter. The body mistakes it for calcium, so it deposits in the bones and the teeth, which is why you can measure it in baby teeth. And it causes bone cancer and bone marrow cancers like leukemia. And again, interesting, you should look up the Tooth Fairy project. It's very interesting work being done. So what studies have been done in terms of the above ground testing? Well, the National Cancer Institute of the US did a study looking at iodine-131. Again, there are many, many, many toxic products. They're just picking one. This is a map that they made of the exposure. So the lowest exposure is the lightest red. It goes up, and then it increased exposure through into dark red, light blue, into dark blue. So the most exposure is over on the west coast, which makes sense because it was Nevada. And just because of the prevailing winds and rains, a lot of it ended up on the east coast. And again, a lot of it got into the cow's milk, and then of course children drink more milk. So, but when you actually look at the study, there are remarkably few actual measurements done, and a lot of it's based on estimates and assumptions, and they could be way out with these measurements. But they estimated that about 55 million people who were exposed under the age of 20, well, that they were 55 million people exposed under the age of 20 starting in 1952, and they estimated over 200,000 excess thyroid cancers to be expected over a lifetime. And again, the latency can be decades with this cancer. And this is interesting. They figured the average exposure was 2 rads with a big range from 0.1 up to 16. Now, just to give you some perspective, our 1.0 millisievert is 0.1 rad, and that's what we're allowed in a year. So their average was 2.0 rads, going up to 16 rads. So there was significant exposure to iodine-131. Again, children are more vulnerable than adults. And just last comment about Chernobyl. This happened in 1986, level 7 accident, which Fukushima actually eventually did attain. Massive explosions, big plume going up 9 kilometers and going worldwide. About 200,000 times the strength of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. And massive evacuation. Now, how many people died? Well, initially, and there's still people that believe that it was about 31, and these were the workers. And then United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation said, well, maybe were as many as 64. And then the IAEA, a very pro-nuclear organization, along with the World Health Organization, did another estimate and figured it might be 4,000. And then Greenpeace looked at all the studies and estimated up to 200,000 excess cancer, and that's just cancer deaths. They found increases in all sorts of illnesses, cardiovascular, chromosomal aberrations, etc. But they did find a lot of poor research methodology. And then this book came out, I think it was last year, 2010 maybe, and it's a collection of it's looking at and analyzing all of the studies that were done, including the Eastern European studies, which everybody else had dissed. And this fellow, I think it was Radioactivity, was the co-founder of Greenpeace in Russia. So they estimated almost 1 million premature deaths, which in fact intuitively makes a lot more sense when you look at what really happened. But again, this is very controversial, and you can look at it online, but again, you're not looking at every single study. He's looked at thousands of studies and made a comment at the end, estimating 985,000 premature deaths. But so my feeling is there are a number of very intelligent, well-informed, level-headed scientists who say that overall this is to be relied on. So in summary, radiation is harmful in any dose, particularly to children and growing fetuses and women. And a nuclear accident can happen anywhere, anytime, and it's catastrophic.